Hi, my name is Jean DiGiovanna, President and Founder of Workshop University and Workshop and Webinar Success. I'm thrilled to spend some time with you today to recap the roundtable in case you didn't make it. And what we're going to talk about is really how to turn your expertise into high-impact money-making webinars so you can really become a global expert in your field. Now, I don't know about you, but I had a blast at Jane's event and actually had some breakthroughs. So I hope that in this time together that we have, you'll leave with some concrete tips on really how to get started with webinars and really also understand the biggest mistake to avoid. And then I'll make sure I tell you how to get more information at the end. All right, so first off, webinars can be lucrative. And many people who are thinking, if you're thinking about, geez, I've been running workshops, I'm looking to run webinars, but it's just overwhelming. Let me first tell you that one, it is generating revenue for you. It can. So on average, when you run a webinar, you can actually increase your list by about 10 to 30%. You can actually make between $1,000 and $5,000 and upwards to $10,000 and even more. So those numbers are conservative. And I'll teach you what is so important to make sure you fill them and actually how to make offers at the end. But I'm gonna really at least clue you in onto some key concepts to think about before you get started. So I'm gonna step through the 5 steps to get started. And the first one comes from my program, and it's really what I talk about is the 5 purchasing principles. The first purchasing principle that I cover is what I call right topic, right time, right price. And actually in your handout, there's actually 5 key steps, and you'll be filling those in as we go through the video today. So right topic, right time, right price. What that means is all 3 of these have to be in place for your webinar to succeed and to actually fill people in those seats. So for example, you could have the best topic in the world. It could actually be free, right? No better price than that. But it's not what your target market needs right now. So they'll look at the marketing and they'll say, oh, that's nice, but it's not what I need. And so they won't sign up. So you've got to ensure that those 3 components are in place. Now you could have the right topic that you know your target market needs right now, but if you overprice it, again, you won't fill the webinar. So the first step I really want you to consider is ensuring that each webinar that you look to design has the right topic, the right time, and the right price. And I have a template called the Topic Launcher that steps you through 5 questions that really get you to understand what are some potential topics, right, that align with my gifts and talents, that serve the target market that I want to serve, and really lights me up and gets that message out for, of course, the right price. So if you think about it, for those of you who have been running workshops, or maybe you've been also running webinars, for those that haven't gone the way that you've really wanted them to, go back and see if one of those components might not have been in place. So that's the first step in really ensuring that people come to your webinar, they register. Now another tip I want to give you, or statistic, is that on average, 50% of the people who actually register for your webinar will attend live. So that's important to know in terms of what numbers you're looking to shoot for, so that about half of those will attend live. And on average, between 20 and 40% of the people who didn't show up will actually listen to the recording. So just some statistics to keep in mind. All right, let's look at step 2. When I teach even workshops and webinars, think about the last workshop or webinar that you attended. What made it so successful? And I'm going to bet that the components of that, or the qualities of that, fit into one of 3 pieces of this equation. And I call this the equation for creating high-impact webinars. Not just good ones, but great ones. And the acronym is EVA, E-V-A. So the first part of the equation stands for experience. You want to be sure that when you create your webinar and you deliver it, that your attendees leave with an experience. It's engaging, it's experiential. The second piece is that the information is valuable. So the V stands for value. And what I mean by that is the information is relevant and it's immediately applicable. So what you cover in your webinar, people can take right away and apply in their business or their life. The last component of that equation is action. And what I mean by that is you've got to have a call to action that you ask your attendees to take after that webinar. So, for those who run workshops, there's how do you determine if it was successful? And a lot of times we use evaluation forms, right? Or surveys at the end. And people fill them out, and we actually dictate the measure of success of that workshop or webinar is how people did on your evaluation. Well, guess what? The measure of success, I say, is have those attendees taken action after they attended your webinar. That's how you know your webinar has been successful. So one thing that I always do is at the end of the webinar, before I actually close, I always have an action item table. And I ask people to take a moment and come up with one action they're willing to take on out of listening to this webinar, and to take a moment and write it down, right? Write it down wherever they are at their desk or on their computer. And as they're writing it down, I always say, if you're writing down something that you already know you won't do, then please stop, because it would be a waste of your time and energy to keep putting that in your table. So then I just say, think of something that you will do, even if it's the tiniest action. Because in the end, when people take action, that's how you know you've succeeded. So we're going to talk in a second about how to keep your webinar engaging or experiential. But again, just to recap this step, high impact equals experience plus value plus action. Let's go to the third step. And this is one of the biggest mistakes I have seen people make. And a lot of people come to me after they've run, a workshop they want to turn into a webinar, or they have run a webinar and it hasn't really been as successful. And I say to them, let's take a step back and tell me, what's the purpose of this webinar? Who is it actually for? What's the area of pain that your target market is experiencing? So what I call this is setting the foundation before going into design and develop your webinar. See, so often we're so passionate about what we want to do. What do? We immediately start creating PowerPoint slides, right? This is natural. We start creating the content. And I often will work with people who have been doing workshops for years and webinars for years. And no matter what stage they're at, I always ask them, before working with me, as the first step, before we actually get together, I want you to fill out the set direction template. And those questions, and there's actually, I'll make sure I tell you how to get that free tool at the end. The questions are outlined such that it really forces you to think about, why am I doing this? What's the pain that I'm looking to alleviate? What are the learning objectives, right? So learning objectives are those key things that your attendees are going to get as a result of attending your webinar. And the important thing is those learning objectives are used to actually set the foundation for your design. So your design is driven off those objectives, and so is your marketing, right? Because you want everything aligned here. So the key point I want to make with step 3 is set the foundation first before you start designing your content. The other piece of the foundation is really understanding what your offer might be, and I'll talk about that in the last piece of this video. Okay, step 4, keep it engaging at all times. Now, with a webinar versus an in-person workshop or seminar, right, it's very different. You've got to design it differently. So for those of you who are already doing workshops out there and you want to start converting your material into webinars, it absolutely is possible. But you've got to think differently about your design, right? So in an in-person workshop, you might be doing exercises. You're going to have people doing in-person working sessions, right? Well, you can't have that on a webinar. So what happens is, and what I mean by you can't have it, is that generally the webinars I'm talking about are those webinars that are like an hour, 90 minutes, that really engage people into who you are, what you have to offer, so that then you can make an offer for the next stage. Now, in general, you're not going to run a part of your webinar and ask people to stop and, jot down things all the time or partner up, right? So the work actually has to happen either after the webinar or in between webinars if you're doing a webinar series. So what that means is we have to be a lot more creative in the content that we include in the webinar. We've got to make sure people have enough information, meaning lots of examples, maybe doing a demo in the webinar, so that when they leave and they do the homework or the action, they're going to have everything that they need. Now, one of the fastest ways, or one of the best ways to actually engage your audience on a webinar is the use of what's called polls. A poll is simply a question that you actually set up in the webinar tool in advance. And you set up a question, and then you usually have 4 to 5 multiple choice answers. So for example, when I kick off my webinars, I always start with a poll, and that's important. It's really great to get your audience engaged right away, right? So I put a poll up, and the poll typically says, what's your experience running webinars? And there might be 4 options that they choose from. Like, I've never run a webinar before. I've run workshops, but not webinars. It might be I've run, 1 to 5 webinars. I've run 5 to 10, and so on. And in about 3 to 5 seconds, I give people an opportunity to answer it. So now they're clicking on their computer into this poll, and within 5 seconds, the results appear on their screen. This is a fabulous way to keep your webinar engaged, keep your attendees engaged on your webinar. And what I recommend is inserting a poll about every 10 minutes of your webinar. And it's also a great way to actually share some surprising statistics or some facts and have people guess on what the answer is. The other thing to know about engagement is on a webinar, you have to remember, right, all we have is audio and we have visual. So images are critical to use in your webinar. Less text, more pictures. Animation. I know some people, poo-poo it, and they're like, oh, you shouldn't use animation, any moving things on your screen. Well, I actually disagree, because any kind of state change is going to keep your audience engaged. Now, there's obviously you don't want to go overboard on the animation, okay? And I like to use the fading in and fading out, and I don't use as much of like the rushing of the text in or the, checkerboard out. You don't need to go crazy on the animation. The point here is you want to have a state change every few minutes. And that could be either a poll, an image that people are looking at, an animation. It could be multimedia, use of video, okay? One thing to know, different from an in-person workshop or seminar, generally the statistic is to keep about 70% of your audience in experiential exercises and about 30% actually delivering information, right? Like presentation. In a webinar, that fact is actually switched around. So in your handout, when you talk about the formula for success is actually 30% engagement, 70% presentation. So as you can see, the numbers switch, which means we've got to be really creative with how we're visualizing our information on that webinar. And the last piece is you get to use your voice as a way to keep your audience engaged. So that's really critical. The 5th step, and this is a thing that, this is one of the reasons why people veer away from webinars, is the technology. And one of the key things here is you've got to test the technology out in advance, right? Now, some people feel overwhelmed. You run a webinar, you got to manage the questions, you have to manage other, pieces on your dashboard, and people say, oh my God, it's too much, I'm just not going to do them anymore. So I want to give you a couple of tips. One is, how do you multitask when you're on a webinar and you're running it? The best way to handle that is to actually be really clear. You've got to train your audience on how you want them to to really operate with you on that webinar. So in terms of handling questions, for example, I always recommend have a set time in your webinar for Q&A. And only open it up at that time. And that way your focus is also dedicated right to the chat box or the Q&A box in the webinar tool, and you can focus there. You don't have to flip back and forth. You can also save Q&A for the end. And in the beginning of your webinar, you always let people know how they can insert and enter questions and when will we actually be answering questions. So you're really setting all those expectations up front, and it makes the delivery of the webinar so much easier. Now the last piece I want to cover is what I call the biggest mistake to avoid. I wish that I had actually learned this a long time ago. So just to let you know kind of some background, I have a corporate training business that I started in '98. And I was delivering corporate training, and I still do that in all soft skills. So I teach consulting skills, coaching skills, public speaking skills, all communication skills for employees within corporations. Now, the thing is, all my clients were high tech. That was the background that I came from. And as you know, in 2000, if you recall, the high tech bubble burst. I lost all my corporate clients. Actually, I lost all my clients in my business. So instead of trying to fight an uphill battle, I'd always wanted to get trained and certified as a coach. So back in 2000, I took CTI's training program, and I got trained and certified. And I just started coaching people. I loved it. I was doing life coaching, business coaching, but it wasn't bringing in enough income. So I thought, how could I use all my skills and talents and bring in more income? So that's when I started running public workshops and seminars in topics I knew people needed and that I could deliver. So I was doing topics around life strategies, business strategies. It was fabulous. And probably within 3 years, those corporate clients started coming back. But here's the thing that was missing. I was just running these workshops as one-offs, right? They were like, oh, people need this right now. I'm going to do this. This is fun, you know? And so the closest thing I actually had in bringing people in and continuing to have them come back for more business, because really the only business, I shouldn't say the only business, the business I was bringing in where I was attracting coaching clients out of my workshops. But it was pretty random, right? I wasn't selling a coaching package at the end of my workshop, but the closest thing I had was I used to call them frequent workshop cards. And so I would give these out at a workshop, and I would have a little hole puncher, you know, like the cafes have. If you buy 10 drinks, you get one free. So I had if you buy 4 workshops, you get one free. That was the closest thing I had to actually keeping customers or clients into my funnel. So I share this mistake because I want you to not only get your message out, I want you to reach as many people as possible and continue to help them grow and develop. So one of the biggest mistakes people do is they leave their attendees hanging. That's what I was doing all those years. And finally I took a seminar with T. Harv Eker, and I learned how to actually make an offer, and the thought of making an offer after a workshop or a webinar. So the whole idea is this. If you are providing a ton of value, your webinar is high impact, it's experiential, it has value, and there's a call to action, you are providing an amazing experience for your attendees. If you are not giving them tools to take their learning to the next level, you're actually providing a disservice to them. So what I actually, and this is so important, is right from the beginning, I have people think about in that set direction template, what's the offer that you will make after this first webinar? So I have a tool called the offering strategy, and it really has you think through from the beginning stage, not at the end of designing your webinar, but in the beginning, here's the webinar I want to create. Typically your first webinar that you launch will be a webinar that you cover a couple things in detail, really dive deep, give some value, and then let people know, hey, and here's the other 4 or 5 things you can do, or that the steps in the process, right? So have your system. And as Lisa Sasevich says, I love her, she uses a concept, or created a concept called PSPS, problem, solution, problem, solution. And what that means is this. you first want to have your first webinar is all about getting people to understand what you know, what you offer, the value you provide. So you want a low barrier to entry, typically a free webinar between 30 minutes and 75 minutes, not too long, right? And then you make an offer at the end of that webinar to get to the next level. Typically your offers are more money and more time, increased intimacy with you, right? The best way to create or understand what your next offer is, and this came from a Lisa Sasevich event, which I love, was she said, after people take that first webinar, what's the problem they're still going to have? And that's how you determine what your next offer will be. And then when you create that next thing, maybe it's a coaching package. Once they have the coaching package, what's the next thing that, what's the problem they'll still have, right? So this is one of the things I really have people start thinking about right from the beginning so that you continue to provide value to your attendees. This is not about what can I sell, right? It's about how can I continue to be of service and continue to help those attendees grow and develop. Now, one thing to know is at the end of your webinar, you always want to offer something for free, right, that they haven't already learned in the webinar that will take them to the next level, and something for fee, because not everyone will purchase the next offer. So that's really the steps that we covered, the biggest mistake we covered in the round table. And I actually want to show you, I want to talk a little bit about the project plan, so be sure that you download that. That really takes you through all the different milestones and steps to get your webinar really up and launched to your target market. And one of the things I highly suggest, because I have templates literally for each stage in the process, is first off, if you want to get started right away, you can download a free quick start kit that includes the topic launcher template. That's how you create your topics, and then the first template in the design process, which is the set direction template. You can simply get that at workshopandwebinarsuccess.com. And once you get onto that site, there'll be a little banner that kind of pops up or slides up on the bottom, and you can always just enter your name and email and get started right away. For those of you, though, who are really ready to take your topic and fully design your webinar and get it marketed, priced, and launched, I actually have a program for that. It's a home study course. It's 4 modules, and you can find information on that in the webinar fast track program and module details, and then the offer sheet. So literally the module 1 is going to talk about creating your webinar foundation. The second module is how to design your webinar, and I include a piece on taking it from a workshop to a webinar so you can see the transition. The third is how you price and market your webinar so it fills every single time. And then the fourth is all around mastering the webinar technology. You're going to get the top 10 webinar tools, all the different features to figure out which one is best for me. You're going to understand actually how to set up a webinar, how to actually run it, and also what do you do as follow-up. And here's the bonus that I want to include in this, and this is on your sheet as well. One of the things that I have found challenging is reinventing the wheel every single time you create a new webinar. I want to make this super easy for you. I have actually taken my own format that has been successful every single time in terms of the sequencing of my slides, and I've actually abstracted that out and created a done-for-you PowerPoint presentation that you simply fill in. So can you imagine already having a nice PowerPoint template, and then some of the slides will give you examples of here's a slide with a big graphical image, here's a different slide where the image is on the right, the text is on the left. I give you all different ways that you can create engagement, and then each slide actually tells you what to put inside that slide. So it is super easy, done for you. I want to make that available to you as a bonus, and I also have a very short module in the program that teaches you how to create engaging slides in less than 5 minutes. Honestly, it is super easy, and I really want everyone to know how to do this. So if you're interested in the program, it retails for $597. For Jane's event and for the summit attendees, I want to make the offer for $197. That's $400 off, literally over 50% off. And all you need to do is go to workshopandwebinarsuccess.com/webinar fast track. That's the name of the program. And when you get to the payment screen, just simply put in the discount code SUMMIT, and that will give you the discount down to $197. So I have so enjoyed being with you in these 15, 20 minutes or so. I hope that you've got the steps to really get excited and started with webinars, because the world needs to hear what you have to say, and really it's time to get your message out to a global market. Thank you, and I look forward to connecting with you in the future.